Hello and welcome to the Overland Journal Podcast. I'm your host, Scott Brady, and I'm joined today by David Sullivan. Now, David has been in the automotive industry for a very long time. He worked as marketing director for Subaru, and he's now working as marketing director for INEOS for the new Grenadier and Grenadier Quartermaster. Now, David started his life off in the military. He was an officer in the Marines, so we really get a good chance to talk about his time in the military, his time at Ford, developing some really exciting new products, his lessons that he learned working as a team, working in the automotive industry, and then, of course, this new adventure that he is on with INEOS as a new car company. So it's a really interesting kind of look behind the curtain of what an executive in the marketing capacity for an OEM does. We don't talk about his brands a lot because we really want to focus on his life and we want to focus on his lessons learned. So please enjoy my conversation with David Sullivan.
I also wanted to take a brief moment to thank all of you for listening to the Overland Journal Podcast. By listening to this podcast and subscribing to the Overland Journal magazine, you're supporting our employee-owned and veteran-owned business. Impartial reviews and in-depth content like this would not be possible without your support. If you enjoy the podcast, I think you'd really love the print magazine as well. And 100% of that subscription price goes back into creating the content like you're listening to right now. And as a special thank you for your loyalty, we're giving 20% off any subscription. And that even includes our special lifetime subscription, which includes numerous lifetime-only benefits. You can go to overlandjournal.com and use the code OverlandPodcast at checkout. Again, that's code OverlandPodcast at checkout, and that'll give you 20% off. I sincerely appreciate your support.
Well, David, thank you so much for being on the podcast with me today. I think it's going to be fun to talk about, you spent a lot of time in PR in the automotive industry, but you started your life off in the military. Let's talk a little bit about where you grew up and what got you thinking that it was a good idea to become a Marine officer.
Oh, good Lord. Okay, that's interesting, and thank you for your service. I think it's Armed Forces Day today.
Yeah, is it really?
I think it is actually.
Kudos to both of us.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Thanks for your service, and I don't honestly, Scott, I don't know what got me like super interested in wanting to serve the country. I'd always been a history buff when I was a kid.
Sure.
Grew up in Virginia and Delaware.
Okay.
And I do have some so I think generations before me, some members of the family had served in various conflicts going, as far as we know, going back to the War of 1812, because there's a family cemetery, my grandmother's side, on the eastern shore of Maryland, that's still there. It's in somebody's backyard.
Wow.
On Hooper's Island in Maryland. And one of the grave sites says, Veteran War of 1812. So I know at least on my grandmother's, my dad's mom's side of the family, I had somebody that was all the way back to that part of our history. So as a kid, I was super geeked about history, and we used to go to Gettysburg. I grew up in Delaware, so we were close by with a lot of Civil War sites. And my dad was also a history buff. So, I think growing up in that kind of environment got me interested in military history, and I certainly, when I was in high school, didn't envision myself being a military officer until basically when I was getting ready to apply for college. And my father,
So you did ROTC then?
Yeah, so I went to Virginia Military Institute, and which is basically everybody does at ROTC, but it's not a requirement to go into the military, and wasn't at the time that I attended. And still isn't. So my father had gone there and served for 2 years. He was like what they called a 90-day wonder, second lieutenant in the Army. And did Army boats.
Okay.
The landing craft and stuff like that. Yeah, and he's always, and our families grew up around the water, so we were always, all of us have had loved boats and loved the water.
Dangerous role.
Fun job. So anyway, I think he was like, no, don't go. right? And that reverse logic made me want to go to VMI. And then, just like, I think once I got there, I think I just, at that point in my life, I wanted a challenge.
Yeah, sure.
And the Marine Corps was the most, challenging of the military services. At least that was my perception at the time.
And I would agree with you. I think in many ways it is. And they're the first boots on the ground. They're the last boots to leave. And that's a distinction that only the Marines can claim. So. And
combined forces, so air, boats, land, anything, the Marines have it. So
yeah, and I have such respect for that branch of the military. My grandfather, Chief Warrant Officer in the Marines, he also grew up in Virginia, and his mom faked his birth year to get into World War II. And so he was in it, I think, 16 and a half, maybe 17 years old.
Wow.
She couldn't afford to feed him anymore. And he fought Iwo Jima, Guadalcanal.
Holy moly! Wow.
One of the Frozen Chosen.
Do you know what unit? Well, if he was a Frozen Chosen, he was First Marines.
He had a whole career,
which is my regiment. Yeah.
He had a whole career in the Marines.
Wow.
All the way to retirement. That spanned from him being very, very young and in World War II all the way through the Korean conflict. Multiple Purple Hearts, because you do that for long enough, you're going to get wounded more than a couple times.
Yeah.
So just incredible. Not only lessons for me growing up, but because of his ethics and because of his work ethic around business, it changed my life. What he did going from nothing, where his mom couldn't feed him, to having a career in the Marines, becoming a successful businessman, and then leaving generational support to his family is pretty unbelievable. So
that generation did amazing things.
They really did.
Yeah.
And I just have such respect for them. Yeah. And respect for what you did too. So now you're going through military, through the military universities, and what did you graduate with, and what did you start doing when you started?
Yeah, no. So it's funny because I was really good at history as a kid, but when I went to VMI, I'd always been interested in cars too. So I'm a lifetime gearhead, and
there you go. That's a good fit.
And that's what got me into mechanical engineering. So I ended up in the engineering program, graduated as a Mechie, and went in the Marine Corps as a second lieutenant. Did my tours there, and spent time at Desert Storm, and that was a great way to kick off and begin life, and big adventure. And you talk about adventure. Geez, oh Pete, we saw a lot of the world on that. I spent a year deployed, and we saw a lot of the world in that year that we were deployed.
What was one of your favorite places that you visited?
I was always struck by Singapore. The city of Singapore. It's just it's a beautiful city. It's a diverse city.
Sure.
The food and the just the atmosphere, and it's a clean city.
I've heard
because
it's very safe
if
as well.
you cannot litter there. If you do, they'll nab you. So it's a fairly strict government there, and God bless them, they run that city like clockwork, and it's a beautiful place to visit. And I really enjoyed my time there.
Yeah, well, that's a good
exotic place.
I would say I would say so. Absolutely.
Yeah. Crossroads.
So when did your career in the Marines end?
So I felt like I was working in small boats with some of the special operations units in the Marine Corps in early days. They had just picked up boats, and a lot of the tactics and a lot of the SOPs and a lot of they were just basically starting all that stuff in the early 90s. So it was early on, and I honestly could have made an entire career out of just doing that in the Marine Corps. But I just felt like I wasn't happy, and felt like something was missing, and I wasn't using the degree that I'd graduated with.
Sure.
And I just I felt like I need to do something else with my life. So looking for another challenge, and left the Marine Corps active duty. Was lucky enough through a church I belonged to in San Clemente, where we were based, or where we had an apartment off base. There was a former Ford sales guy that was in the congregation.
Okay.
And he said, hey, give me your resume, and over coffee after church one day, and give me your resume, and I'll try to get it into, and urge me to apply.
Sure.
And so I said, okay, and I didn't really know what it was really for. It was Ford engineering, right? And I
Sure.
had no idea, I was like, okay, sure, like go engineer something. So I gave him a copy of my resume as part of my offboarding process at the base, and then ended up going back to South Carolina. My parents had moved to South Carolina in the meantime. Stayed with them for a couple of months. Started applying for jobs, doing all that. Not sure what I wanted to do. Ended up reapplying the same job through, I think it was Automotive News or somewhere. I don't know. I found it in the library and saw a job description. Back then there was no internet, so you found it in a magazine or a newspaper or whatever. So I sent in another resume, another version of my resume, and then I can't remember, but somehow had sent in a third version, and for whatever reason, and got a call. And got a call back a couple weeks later, and went up to Fort. So they flew me up to Dearborn for an interview, and I swear to God, I had four interviews with four different people within the truck organization.
Sure.
And at the time I was like a car guy, like I wanted a sports car. I was a young guy,
wanted to
right?
be on the Mustang,
I just wanted to be on the car side. Didn't realize that the truck side at Ford was really the place to land.
Sure.
And just dumb luck. One thing led to another. And it's funny. All four interviews, three of the four interviews I went to, each person had a different version of my resume. So I don't know. I don't really know how that happened. But anyways, it happened.
It worked out.
God bless Ford HR. No, but I was blessed. Ford's a great organization.
It seems like
I made some phenomenal friends there.
Yeah.
We still keep in touch with a few.
Yeah, sure.
And just good people there.
And what kind of engineering did you specialize in your time with Ford?
So I hired in as a sort of apprentice. There was a college graduate program where you rotated through a bunch of different jobs in your first 2 years, 2.5 years of the company. So they put me in the FCG program, Ford College Graduate Program, even though I was about 5 years older than all my peers.
Yeah, sure.
But I hadn't had any, practical work experience outside of being a Marine. So that was fortuitous. My first job, I landed with a gentleman named Bob Griffith, and we were engineering frame components on the 97 F-150 program.
Cool.
And Bob was a former Army officer, so he was veteran friendly, and I couldn't have landed in a better place. And Bob was, I would say, probably one of the best two bosses I've ever had in my entire lifetime.
Wow.
Just a wonderful man, very considerate, always asked lots of questions, didn't just tell you what to do.
Sure.
He was just a great mentor and coach.
Wow.
And a great engineer.
Sure.
And I just remember, like, one day we were trying to I was designing a heat shield, and they were, the previous design had used a lot of a really expensive material. It's like a bubbly shape material, and it was just, it was very expensive to form and source and work with. It was hard to work with. So they were having a hard time figuring out how to shape this thing around this really tight packaging situation where the catalytic converter was near the body, and you had to shield the body or you're going to fry somebody's foot.
Sure.
So, and of course, back in those days, they were just, we were getting heavy into emissions programs, and so the cat was running pretty hot. And so you had to make sure that you were protecting it properly. And so I worked on for a week or two or whatever, and was having a hard time figuring things out. And I went to Bob and said, Bob, I don't know what's going on here. I don't know how to get this thing to form right, because this material is like really, it would just crack.
Sure.
It was very hard to turn into a decent shape.
To hit those
and
radiuses,
you had this back in those days. We're still using drawings. We were just starting to use CAD. Right, but so you were doing like very linear things with CAD. I had a great CAD designer, Canadian, and young man. He was just he said, Dave. Bob and I talked about the problem. Sorry, and he said, Dave, those baking sheets? Those things you bake your your croissant on or whatever, you throw them in the oven. what if we use that air gap to create just a little insulator?
Bit of insulation.
Yeah, a little bit of insulation. And so I'm like, puzzled over that for a while. Like, yeah, I think that's going to work. It just need enough air gap to make sure it insulates properly. So I went to my CAD designer and I said, hey, I need this complex curve to get around the envelope that the cat's going to be in, because it rolls and it jumps and it does all sorts of things when the powertrain's moving around. So you had this envelope you had to work around. So he spent a lot of time on it, and lo and behold, we created this super complex curve part, but we were using very simple materials and inexpensive materials that allowed us to fit in this envelope, and it went to production.
Problem solved.
Yeah, problem solved, went to production, and it was I ended up saving like $7.50 a vehicle, which
a lot of money.
On a volume vehicle like that is a lot of money.
The F-Series is the most popular truck. I mean, the highest volume pickup truck.
Yep.
I mean, the chance to work on the F-150.
That was, blessed, lucky,
what an unbelievable
as my first job. As my first job.
Like one of the most important vehicles within the entire Ford portfolio, and one of the most popular vehicles, period, is an F-150.
Yeah, and so for 4x4s, another little anecdotal engineering story. So one day I was in the design studio, and I was chit-chatting with one of the exterior designers. Craig, I can't remember Craig's last name. He was a great guy. And we were just puzzling over a problem. And we were looking at tow hook designs. And, Jeep had a version, and Chevy had a version. Sure. Ford didn't have a tow hook that they had shown, that was like basically visible to the naked eye. So, but it's, it's a big, if properly designed, it's a big piece of metal hanging on the front of the frame, and would affect the crash pulse in the vehicle significantly. Yeah. Negatively.
And there's so many other factors at play, because do you build it to 1 times gross vehicle weight? Do you build it to 2 times gross vehicle weight? What's the shear load?
What's the design envelope?
An angle?
Yeah, that's right. So I looked at a bunch of competitive designs, and I was out with my CAD designer at lunch one day, and just we sketched it on a napkin.
I love that.
And like I'm like, look, I want a combination of this and a combination of that. He's like, oh, a little like this, and I'm like, no, let me, and so we played around with a couple of design concepts on a napkin at a sandwich place in Dearborn. And
what do they call that? Napkin-aided design?
Yeah, something like that.
Napkin-aided design?
Yeah, napkin-aided design. That was, or sandwich-aided design, yes. So sad.
There's a lot of good ideas that come from a lunch break.
Yeah,
because you get out of the office and you shake things up a little bit.
Yeah, no, so we, same thing. I found a way to source it out of aluminum to keep the weight down. Yeah. Because it was very, if you did it in iron, it was going to be super heavy. Mm-hmm. And we ended up solving the problem about the crash pulse on the vehicle by designing a fastener that was very strong in tension, but with the right amount of shear force, would just literally shear the hook off the frame and not affect the crash at all.
Gotcha.
And so actually won an award for that design at Ford Truck Significant Achievement Award. So and that same shape of tow hook is on every single Ford 4x4 today.
How cool is that?
Yeah, I did it on a napkin. Yeah, it was it was like one of those things. Like now they don't make them the same way. They've changed the design several times, several iterations, but the basic shape of the tow hook is the one I drew on a napkin, 30 years ago.
And that's something in our industry that is a challenge at times. I mean, even recently, Toyota with the Tundra, they released the Tundra without front tow hooks because they couldn't meet pedestrian crash. They couldn't. Yep. Now they've since resolved that, but that's a very difficult challenge for manufacturers.
It's not an easy engineering problem to solve. Yeah. Because of the forces involved, and you don't want that object to interfere with the job the frame's designed to do, which is to mitigate the force coming into the occupants.
Wow.
So fun jobs. I mean, just again.
Totally.
Yeah, so much fun.
And I'm thinking like at this arc of your life. I mean, you're starting off in the military, which is teaching you how to become part of a team, how to not be an army of one,
be a team player,
but an army of many. and be a team player and listen to your superiors because you don't have a choice. Those are the things that I benefited from the military. It taught me that there's a consequence to not listening to what people tell you to do. So you start off in the military, you build this experience as a leader, and then you have the chance to go work for Ford, which is one of the most respected automakers in the world, work on one of the most popular and important models. So you've gone from leadership now into engineering. So what comes next for you? How do you get from engineering to working in the roles that you are today?
Yeah, so we all right, so during this time frame I was in a different rotation outside engineering. So some friends of mine and I were actually this is a very insider story from Ford, from the Ford days. We were standing outside of a meeting in Building 3, I think, which is one of their primary engineering buildings in Dearborn. And we were saying, there wasn't, as young people, and a lot of, we're all car people, so we're all always talking about vehicles. And so we were like, there's nothing I really want to drive. The Mustang at the time was a very specific thing for a very specific person, and cool cars. But, in Dearborn, especially in the winter, hard to drive, right?
Yeah.
And so so we were all like sort of really into the crossover scene, which had literally just the RAV4 just come out that year, I think, if I remember right. This is like 94, 95.
Yeah, mid-90s, yeah.
And we were sort of jealously looking at that vehicle going, boy, I wish there was something that we had that we could all embrace and enjoy and drive, but something a little sportier and a little bit more on the for American taste. So we were sitting outside, and I just went to my friend Jim. I was like, why don't we just come up with it? Let's just put it on paper. Why don't we stop complaining about it and let's just put it on paper? So John Crow, Jim Baumbeck, myself, and then we grabbed a couple other friends, Debbie Coleman and Brian Nottmeyer. And the five of us, we were all kind of in the college graduate program, all about the same age, all car nuts.
Yeah.
But we were all working in different parts of the company. So Brian was in finance. Jim, I think, was working in a manufacturing rotation, if I remember right. Debbie was working maybe in marketing. I can't remember where Debbie was working, but she was working in a relevant area of the company. Maybe John was in manufacturing. And I was actually working in marketing too. So we all had a sort of different experience level and skill set. And we ended up, we started spending some time together on weekends, and we wrote this business case and basically created an entire vehicle from scratch.
Escape?
Including the bill of materials, yeah. We created the entire bill of materials from scratch, like a couple thousand parts. Phased it out, figured out where we would manufacture this thing, and figured out the dollars to make sense of it. At least a rough business case.
Sure.
And so one weekend, I think it was Jim's boss came in, who was John Lawler, who was recently the CFO, came in and caught him in the office. He was like, what are you doing? And he was like, he fessed up, of course, right? And told the truth and said, hey, this is, we were just doing this for fun. Like, we just, we're curious, how does this all work? And Lawler, to his credit, said, all right, I'll sponsor you. I'll put you in front of the head of truck if you guys put this thing, let's clean it up and turn it into a real business case. So we did, and we went in front of Jim Engelhart, who was the VP of truck at the time, and pitched it, and he was like, love it. And so they sent it over to the product planning office, and one thing led to another. And I was working on the Jaguar S-Type and the Lincoln not Aviator, whatever the sedan was at the time.
Okay.
And in another job, and they decided to turn it into a real program, and so they asked us to work on it. So I started working on it. They bought Mazda, and then they found out Mazda was working on similar things. So they asked who wanted to go over to Japan and work on it. They raised my hand and went. So
you moved to Japan.
Yeah, moved to Japan, and yeah.
I have to say that Japan is one of the most, to me personally, one of the most fascinating cultures on this planet.
It is, yeah.
Now, what did you think? And I've only been there one time. I went to Nagoya to take delivery of some Land Cruisers, but even that experience was mind-blowing. How was it to live there?
It's actually a very livable country. I was, I kind of wondered to this day. I was like, did I really know what I was getting myself into? But it's a wonderful country, wonderful people. I still have very close friends from both from that program and from later on working at Subaru later in life. Japanese people are they're genuine. They're very
incredible people.
Yeah, very humble, very genuine people, and it's an incredible culture. And I really enjoyed my time there.
And I love the fact that it's completely first world, but totally different than Western culture.
The culture is completely different, and
in so many good ways too.
Yeah, and so it's interesting. I mean, there's a lot more nuance and a lot more like you don't come at someone like straight away, as we would say. Let's just be honest with each other and get to brass tacks or whatever.
Sure.
Whatever. It's very nuanced, and you have to approach people from the side. You don't come at somebody too hard, because the concept of face I think in most Asian societies is a very real thing, and you don't want someone to lose face or embarrass them. That is the worst thing you could possibly do to someone in that culture, and they will immediately shut down, and you won't get anything or anywhere, right? And so I learned that very quickly, and
lesson learned.
Yeah, well, and so you just you learn how to maneuver and how to talk to people, and generally in at least at that time in Japanese society, you would go out, you would talk about things at work, and like you would get nowhere, right? And you would, we need to study, and we need to consider, and we need to talk to this person, that person, and so it was very hard to make progress. But then you go out drinking together.
They do like to do that.
And then everything opens up, and that's when you get business done. And that
couple drinks in,
everybody can be. You can lower the curtain a little bit, and everybody can be themselves, and that's actually when you would get a lot done.
Interesting.
So yeah, it's a wonderful society. It's a fascinating society.
I have such respect for that.
Yeah, it's a wild place, and there are obviously downsides to the culture as well. It can be a bit stifling, and people will not always be honest because they don't want to lose that honor, that face, or whatever you want to call it. So you have to be careful because a lot of it's nuance. If somebody says, nobody will ever say no to you straight off, generally, unless they know you really well. They'll just sort of say, well, and it'll just keep going and going and going, but it's really a no. You know what I mean? So you have to sort of
learn the language.
You have to learn how to do
the
that.
language of no.
Yeah.
In Japan.
Yeah.
Now, was that about the time that Ford was coming into this whole premium auto group concept? Is that about?
Yeah, PAG, I think, was
a thing.
Holy
cow, that was unbelievable.
Jackson Nasser, and
that was unbelievable to watch.
Yeah, bought up Jaguar, Land Rover, Mazda was part of the fold. It was look, Ford at the time was a very dynamic company. We were lucky, all of us, to that they were even receptive, and again, John was a great leader. The fact that he became CFO, I think, is this testament to how just what a great leader the dude is. And Jim's very high up in the organization now. Jim's one of the smartest people I've ever met.
Wow.
So Ford is full of just really down to earth, great people, very smart people.
Yeah, that's been my experience.
Yeah, it was a great organization, so I was blessed to have been part of it.
And what a moment in time, and what a company to kind of grow, get your chops in the automotive industry.
Well, so anyway, that I ended up in program management and helping to manage that program through the initial stages. We got the whole thing sourced while we were in Japan, taught the Japanese engineering team how to sort of navigate the Ford sourcing system and procurement systems and engineering systems, and sort of got them, into the world of Ford, if you will. And then at that point, I was offered a job as a frame engineer on the 2000 Explorer, and ended up moving back to Dearborn. I'd just gotten married, just had a kid, and ended up in Dearborn working as a frame engineer. And so took over that project when it was very nascent stages, but ended up taking that project from basically concept all the way to production.
Wow.
And then at that point,
and designing a frame for a full size.
Everything attaches to the frame. So you what the great learning process for me was as a frame engineer, you get to know everybody.
Yeah.
So I knew the powertrain engineers, the mount engineers, like the electrical, everybody talks to you. So, because you're the backbone in the vehicle. So so I got to learn a lot about engineering the entire vehicle.
And then, so now, what comes next after Ford for you?
So Ford was, I guess I was doing pretty well, and they offered me a stint to go back to school, and I said, look, I'm going to go back to school, and get my MBA. I got a taste of the business side, and I was really curious about the business side of the business.
Sure.
And so wanted to get more, and really did eventually want to work in marketing. That wasn't going to ever probably be possible at Ford. It just wasn't the way at the time. Engineers were engineers, and they sort of stayed in the engineering track. But anyway, ended up going to business school and at Cornell. Had a wonderful
business school.
Oh my God! Geez. I mean, and again, my classmates fell into the right place at the right time.
Sure.
Great group of people.
Yeah.
I still keep in touch with a bunch of my classmates, including our fantasy football league.
Yeah. Sure.
We've been doing that for 22 years now. But I had wonderful, smart, kind, considerate, humble classmates. Just a wonderful experience. And I still talk to, most of my classmates, I would say, or at least our circle, to this day. So
what are some of the things that you worked in all of these dynamic team situations. What were some of the things that you learned around leadership that you think applies in life in general from working with all those amazing people? Was there a couple takeaways for you around leadership and around working in dynamic tems like that? Yeah,
there's a lot of smart people out there if you just listen. And let other people talk. I'm not really doing that right now.
No,
I have a lot of questions for you.
Right now it's your job. Right now it's your job to talk.
Scott, I have a lot of questions for you, bud. But maybe for another time. We'll flip the script on this.
That's right.
Dave's podcast featuring Scott Brady. But no, I think it really, business school for me really opened my eyes because I got to interface with a lot of folks from different industries.
Sure.
And at the same time, I had a buddy, Dave Young, who was at GM at the time, and so I was the Ford guy and he was the GM guy,
sure.
and we would always, throw sticks and stones at each other during classes. And Dave's a wonderful dude, and I just had a wonderful experience and learned to listen and consider and open my ears and my mind a little bit. And I think as a leader, just try to take people's ideas and input and and consider it. You don't have to agree, but you should always consider.
Yeah, true. And take the time to hear them out.
Yeah.
Because that's when real conversations can happen, for sure.
Yeah, and but understand at the end of the day, somebody's got to make a decision, and so I think the balance between that and like us serving in the military, somebody's got to go, okay, got all this information, we're going this way, and please have the respect to say, okay, let's respect the decision to go. And as long as everybody on the team is willing to do that, then you can accomplish a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And then you're all pulling on the same rope.
That's right.
Which makes a real big difference.
Yeah.
So you're taking all of now this new knowledge from business school and this time at Ford, and what comes next for you? So
I was at Ford and went back into project management and program management, and we started working on the one of the escape programs. And I to this day is like woulda, coulda, shoulda. I had the chance to work on the GT40. I turned it down and went to the Escape. I'll admit that in public. Probably a career destroyer. No, I mean it was just,
you never know.
I was so into the Escape. I was so bought into that vehicle line and the concept that it was just
it was
personal. It was personal for me. So I went back to the Escape team, but Ford at the time it was, going through some pretty big changes in management, and tried to bootstrap the program a couple of times unsuccessfully. Got a little frustrated with that, and was looking for a change again. Sure. Looking for a new challenge and new change in life. Had a second kid, and was sort of looking to get closer to friends and family. And so, again, automotive news, I think it was in the print edition. The internet was a real thing at that time, but ended up seeing a job opportunity at Subaru in product planning. Applied for it, got it, and it was on the East Coast, and it was close. My sister was living in Delaware at the time, where we grew up. We went to high school and had grown up. So kind of jumped at it and said, all right, let's, relocated the family to the East Coast, and and spent almost 20 years there. Wow. At Subaru of America. Yeah.
And it's interesting in the travel community, Subaru, everybody, no matter if you own a Land Cruiser or if you own a Land Rover, everybody respects a Subaru. Like they
make a good car.
They make a great car, and you can be. It's surprising the places you can be in the world, and here comes a little Subaru Forester or something bouncing along the road. And one of the things that you mentioned to me in one of our first conversations that I thought was so interesting was you getting involved with the wilderness concept for Subaru. And I just have such compliment, I'm impressed that Subaru took the risk to say we know we have these very durable, capable cars, but we're going to make them a little wilder. We're going to make them a little more interesting to certainly the North American consumer, I would think.
Well, and I give a lot of credit to Ken Lin, who was the head of product planning at the time, former boss, great boss and great guy, very smart man, and the product planners that are there now, because it was sort of a transition. Those guys took it from concept to reality. And Alan Bethke, Jeff Walters, very, very smart leaders at Subaru of America. Tom Dahl, the CEO, at the time, he's since retired, but I think all those people got on the same page, as we just discussed, and we're pulling on the same rope. And there was you could tell. I mean, you could sort of tell in the industry that there was a certain direction, right? And now we're at Overland Expo, and there's thousands of people here, and
that's right.
It's crazy to see how this has evolved in the last 10 years. But I think really good research insights. Subaru's got a very good research team. Mary Alicia Devine, Chris Hurst. These are very smart people.
What did they identify? Because to me, they got it pretty close to right. And there's not. I mean, I've driven the wilderness a few times in various forms, and it seems like it's not only done well but permeated the entire line just about. So what did they identify in the research that they really wanted to see in the final product? Like, what did they feel like people really needed out of a crossover?
Well, I think it was just so if you think about Subaru's marketing strategy and sort of the brand itself, Subarus are safe. Subarus are long-lasting,
reliable,
but most importantly, Subarus are adventurous. And so and that was our mantra. And Alan was a master at, who's head of marketing, was just a master at consistency and getting that message across in all creative, regardless of format.
You're right.
Constantly.
Yeah, true.
And so if you
look at
their marketing, the visuals, everything matches, right? Yeah. And Carmichael Lynch, their primary agency, brilliant agency, great people, very smart people, and very good creative people. Everybody pulls the same direction. Yeah. And Alan was very good at getting everybody to keep moving in the same direction in that regard on the marketing side and sales side as well. Under Jeff's leadership. So I just think people are at the right place at the right time, and there was that, hey, we'd like to be even more adventurous because we think there's opportunity on that side of the industry
for sure
for a company that's already considered to be the safest brand, and we were always swapping places with like Toyota and Honda on who is the safest brand in the United States, who's the most reliable brand or longest lasting. So, and I did all the awards and accolades stuff, so I would always see all that data, and
Sure.
we were very consistently at the top of the industry. So amping up the adventure side and showing people that Subarus could be super capable as well, I think was one of the goals, and I think they pulled it off.
And what an interesting challenge, because to make something more capable and adventurous, it has the potential to come at the cost of it being safe and it being long lasting.
Well, the super engineering team, the engineers are very, very good, and
That's
there's
challenge.
A natural yin and yang between what the marketing and the vision of where the marketers would like to go and where the product engineers are willing to let you go.
Yeah, sure.
And again, obviously the dollars and cents have to all pencil out as well. So,
but it seemed like they really pulled it off. I mean, we have always seen people travel in Subarus, but now more than ever, like, you'll see them with a winch on them. You'll see them with a little bit taller tire. You'll see them with a build-out. You'll also see them driving down the length of the Pan American Highway. So I give them a lot of credit for taking that risk.
Yeah, I have to say, we started. So my team was responsible for doing the STI enthusiast events, but as we started to work on these wilderness models, we tried to pull in. So it wasn't just about the WRX or the STI or the BRZ.
Sure.
We tried to actively engage and pull in the crossover audience or the more, let's say, the more adventurous side of Subaru. So the Foresters and the Outbacks and the Crosstreks, and I think did that fairly successfully and got the entire community engaged in adventure.
Yeah,
and
sure.
And so, again, I give a lot of credit to the agency partners that we worked with, and we had some great partners with Ancira, Carmichael Lynch, the designer in Long Beach. Great, just very smart people and good people, and listened, right?
Yeah.
Collaborated, listened, talked to each other, bounced ideas off of each other, and I got to see this. We would see these crazy builds come into the enthusiast events.
Seriously.
Not just the STIs where people would put in, $25,000 of speed equipment on a vehicle, but now we were seeing Crosstreks with, maybe as much money put into off-road, like wheels, tires,
suspension,
lifts, and
skid
just
plates,
crazy.
Everything.
Some people were doing, like, they were taking the back end of an all Outback and turning it into a trailer. Like, it was just, there was some crazy stuff, and I just love seeing the creativity and the invention, and you see a lot of that here today at Overland Expo. It's just, the amount of creativity that's here is incredible, and so. We knew we were on the right track, and because we were seeing all these, people modifying their Subarus and doing, this wild stuff with it, but they look super cool.
They do, and the number of people that you hear that are into Subarus that say their next one they're going to buy is going to be a Wilderness. So Subaru really nailed it with that. So you went from helping this iconic brand elevate their adventure and bring the Wilderness to market, which is, I think, an incredible accomplishment. And now you're working for INEOS, which is a car company that was started by an enthusiast.
Yes.
And that I've never seen. No question that Henry Ford was an automotive enthusiast, but when you think of Sir Jim Radcliffe, this guy, he's an overlander. The car that he always loved was no longer being made.
Yeah.
And he actually had the courage to say, I'm going to make my own. So you go from working with an enthusiast brand like Subaru to now working with a true adventure machine like the Grenadier. How's that been? What do you think of this?
Well,
of this whole thing?
I'm 6 weeks in.
Yeah, I know.
It's like a month and a half later. Sure. Scott, no. First of all, I told Lynn this, our CEO, when we interviewed. I was like, the cojones that takes to start your own car company from scratch.
I know.
It is. Nobody
does that anymore.
Nobody does that.
Literally,
and so,
nobody does that.
Without funding rounds and all of that, right? And all of the stuff that a lot of the EV companies, unfortunately have had to, or fortunately, maybe, I don't know, because they're competitors, but have had to go through. But I think Sir Jim had a vision, and again, I think people listened and collaborated, and very similar running theme to what we've been talking about here. But
yeah.
I think it's a group of very smart, very good, very genuine people.
Seems like it.
It feels, landing at INEOS feels a lot like when I landed at Subaru.
Sure.
It feels like a place that you could work, productively and happily for a long time.
Sure.
Just because of the quality of the people. And so, look, if there's one thing that I'm blessed with, it's working with amazing, smart, kind, genuine people.
That's been my experience, just how helpful they were, helping me get the vehicle to Africa, and the engineering team when I had questions, or the service team, making sure that I had their phone numbers if I had any issues, which fortunately I never had any issues. I never had to call Rick, but we were pretty lucky along the way. We're at the Overland Expo. This is an enthusiast event. The Grenadier and the Grenadier Quartermaster are both enthusiast-driven vehicles. They're made for this market. What are some of the things that you're seeing as opportunities? So when you look at what you've seen at Overland Expo for the last couple days, where do you think that the Grenadier is positioned? What problems do you think it's solving for the people as you've talked to these customers over the last couple days?
I would say, first of all, I think the sky's the limit for this brand. The vehicle is genuinely capable. Unlike any other vehicle I've ever driven.
Mm-hmm. Or at least
outside
it's on par.
Maybe of a military Hummer.
Yeah,
and
on par with
and the Humvees were incredible off-roaders.
Yeah, they really were. Yeah.
In military spec, bare bones,
sure.
But incredible off-roaders.
Yeah,
So
your spine took the impact for everything else.
yeah, that's right. They did, but the thing would keep going.
That's right.
I think our biggest, honestly, obviously, maybe. Our biggest challenge is awareness.
Yeah.
Before I came to this show, everyone that I knew was like, INEOS, who?
Yeah.
Like what? What is that? And so breaking that awareness barrier.
Yeah.
For people that are not immediately in this community, because
right.
I'm honestly, I've been gobsmacked at the number of Grenadiers I've seen on the ground here.
Sure.
And obviously we brought a few Quartermasters
Sure.
to share, one at your booth, and then that's great. Like they that's the debut of this vehicle, the public debut. But the fact that we've got Grenadiers that people brought their own private vehicles here and have heavily modified them, or put their own spin on them, or their own creativity into, and are showing them off as part of their displays that in some cases literally are their business and the face of their business to the community. I think it's really incredible. Being such a new player, we've only been selling vehicles since November.
Right.
So
I think it's very encouraging to see the rate of adoption. There's lots of great vehicles on the market. Toyota makes great vehicles, Ford makes great vehicles, but to now have another option that's made specifically for overlanding is kind of unheard of. So we are as a community are excited about the fact that there's a manufacturer making cars just for us.
I see a lot of again, I think there's a lot of parallels with and not to say we certainly wouldn't repeat or try to ape anybody else's marketing strategy, but I think there's a lot of parallels with when I landed at Subaru. There was a lot of opportunity.
Yeah.
The brand had been at that time, the brand had been struggling for a while and sort of flatlined in sales, and then the Love campaign and all of that happened, and very, very good insights in marketing, and so hopefully working with our global team over in the UK, we can repeat some of that success by listening to each other, collaborating with each other, looking at data, sharing insights, and being considerate of other people's points of view, and then coming up with the best solution and going, right? Yeah. And so I do think there's a lot that we can do. We certainly have a lot to learn in this market. We have literally just started our first marketing campaign 2 days ago.
Yeah.
So we are early days.
Yeah.
And but seeing the response from consumers here at the show and at the Ride and Drive, I think what we solve most is you buy this vehicle. You don't have to do anything to it.
Right.
You can if you want to make it look a little different or feel a little different or put something on top of it or behind it or on side. You could literally put things all over the darn thing.
Sure.
So, which is cool by itself, because I don't think there's any other vehicle that exists that you can do that.
Certainly that doesn't have aircraft tie-down points down the side of it.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so there is literally nothing like it in the industry, and it looks. I think imposing is not the right word, but it looks substantial.
Yeah, sure.
It feels substantial.
It has presence.
It is substantial, right?
Yeah.
So to be authentic towards what the product is, I think is very important. So from a marketing standpoint, I think, at least from my early insights or learning so far, is if we stick to that authenticity, I think people will gravitate towards it because it's different.
Well, and for me, it's just a gratitude that it exists. It's a gratitude to Sir Jim for taking the risk to build a vehicle for himself that happens to also be a vehicle that I would want to own and drive across Africa like I did. But you guys are also supporting the community. You're supporting the Overland Expo. You have the vehicles here for Ride and Drive so people get a chance to drive them and decide for themselves if it's something that works for them. So your support of the community, your support of me and our crossing of Africa, it means a lot to us. It means a lot to the community that we have the chance to see how these vehicles work and to give open feedback to our audience about how the vehicle performed. It's been a lot of fun to get to know you. I'm really grateful for your service, and I'm excited because of what you've done, like at Subaru, and how you really help to elevate an enthusiast brand. I think that it's a great fit to INEOS, and I'm excited to see what you guys do next.
I can't. There's so many things I want to do. Like with the brand, with the product, with relationships, with partnerships. Like I said earlier, I think the sky's the limit for this brand, and we build a good vehicle.
Yep.
Again, it's capable, unlike anything I've ever driven, that's capable of driving on road legally.
Yeah.
And so that, being authentic to that reality, I think is going to be very important for us. Not trying to be who we're not, but being who we are.
Yeah, sure.
And
you're doing that by being here at the Overland Expo. It's been fun to watch people see the Quartermaster for the first time. They're kind of losing their mind on it.
Yeah, a little bit.
That's been pretty fun.
That's great.
That's been pretty fun for me to see. So I think people can really get a sense for it, and I think they can envision themselves driving it themselves. So, Dave, I really appreciate your support of the community. You in that position of authority around the marketing team means that you're making decisions that support the Overland Expo, that support people, like Andy and Mercedes and their success on the Alcan. Your guys' support of our expedition across Africa, that says a lot about who INEOS is as a company, and we really appreciate it.
Well, I am, again, I'm blessed to be here. We will be a title sponsor of Overland Expo for the rest of the year.
Yep.
We're all in on the community. This is our core.
Yep.
We'll certainly, look at other marketing collaborations and partnerships across other, parts of the industry, but
Sure.
this is our center, right?
Yeah,
so
that's awesome.
we understand that, we know that,
Yep.
and we'll be here for the long haul.
Well, Dave, thanks so much for being on the podcast.
Yeah.
And we thank you
My
all
pleasure.
for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.